Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome back to the Second Bite Podcast. We have a great episode today because Mitch Meyers is with me. Mitch, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for asking me.
So this is going to be interesting because you built a very successful agency, which we're going to dig into, and then you sold that successful agency. But that was many years ago.
Yes,
and so with the wisdom of hindsight and perspective, I'm hoping that there might be some things that you could share with us about Zipatoni, the name of the agency, and we can just kind of unpack that a little bit if we could. So if we start, I know that, and you could fill in all this for us, I know that you were at Miller for a while, and then you launched the agency, and then you built that into quite an agency. Can you take us from pre to launch to how you decided to grow it? And I'll ask questions along the way.
So actually, I was at Anheuser-Busch.
Oh, geez.
I rolled out Bud Light in 1982. So that's going to give you my vintage.
Okay.
Did the whole Spuds McKenzie thing. I was there for 8 years. I did new products. Absolutely loved the company, loved working there. And we had a lot of large advertising agencies, promotion agencies that obviously worked for AB. However, there was a man in St. Louis who was the most creative guy I'd ever met, Jack Thorwegen. And he, whenever I needed a really creative idea, I couldn't get it out of the big guys. And so I would call him. He would give me something that nobody had seen before. And then I would have to use the agencies that we had on staff to execute. So at some point he said to me, he goes, "Why don't you join me?" He said, we could build a great agency and you're my favorite client. And so I'm like, okay, that sounds like fun. So I quit Anheuser-Busch. And
was it really, Mitch, was it really that simple?
Honestly, it was a pretty male locker room back in the 80s when I worked there. And I felt like I really wasn't going to go much higher. I was really the only woman in marketing at the time. I think because my name was Mitch, they thought that, there was some male relation there.
Right.
So anyway, it kind of was that easy. I mean, the entrepreneurial thing really appealed to me. I knew that we could probably still work for AB and I could work for all the brands.
And was it a simple conversation that said, okay, I'll join, I'm 50-50? Were you 50-50?
No, he was the majority owner and I was actually buying into the agency. So everybody thought I was nuts to leave a job with stock options, a job like Anheuser-Busch, right? People die to work there. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, see ya, love you guys, see ya. And so I joined this guy and we're, it's like mom and dad. And we had this house that we were working out of in Missouri. And we're still doing work for Anheuser-Busch. So, I felt like they had trained me in the beer business. They knew what we were made of. And so we started building from there. We started hiring a couple of people. It was the most fun you could have with your clothes on. I mean, it was as creative as I had hoped it would be working with Jack. I was the suit. I was sent in to meet with the clients. And, having sat in that chair, I knew what clients wanted and needed. So it was a really good partnership.
What year is this, Mitch, that you made this move?
1989. 1989 is when I joined.
And so we talked to a lot of different people about doing deals and all like that, right? For a relatively small agency, and then you were going to buy in. How did you decide on any of those things? Like how much is it worth and how many years and all that kind of stuff?
I was pretty naive at that point. I felt like Jack should be the majority owner, but he had put a share price of like $15,000 a share, which doesn't make any sense to me now that I understand this because it wasn't worth anything. It was, was worth what we could bill in a year and the profit margin we could haul in. But, I'm blonde. I'll admit it. And I just said, this sounds like a great thing. So I took a cut in pay. I gave up my stock and I said, okay, I'll buy it. So we kept a little bit of treasury stock so that we could bring on other key partners like a writer and maybe another account person. So the first couple of years, we stayed small and we worked for Anheuser-Busch. We worked for Ralston Purina, Continental Banking, big companies that were in the St. Louis area, and we are growing nicely. And then as I started looking at our financial statements, I was realizing that AB was taking the majority of our resources and delivering the minority of my profit margin because they would ask for a lot and they wanted ideas for free. And then if they picked your idea, they would execute and pay you to do it. But you spent a lot of time pitching things you didn't get. So as I started flying around the country and picking up clients, I got Snapple out of New York. I had Mercury Records. And what I realized was they really respected our thought process, our creativity, our execution. You know, we're Midwesterners. We work harder. We're not as expensive as the New York, LA, Chicago agencies. So we were picking up business and growing. And I realized that it kind of wasn't fair what Anheuser-Busch was taking from us and what we were getting at the end of the day. So Jack and I decided that we were going to pitch Miller Brewing Company and see if that was more profitable. Well, you can imagine, you're so competitive.
That's in the camp though, right? Miller and Bud, man, that's...
Oh my gosh, such oil and water, like hated each other, hated.
Did Jack think you were crazy for wanting to do that?
No. In fact, we lost a creative director who was so talented, who came to us and said, I'm out. You know, Starbucks has a great job. I'm going there. These people do not appreciate what we do. And he was right. You know, it was kind of abusive. And so I put on my dark glasses, get on an airplane, fly up to Milwaukee, and I walk in to pitch and, you know, talk to some of the marketing people. And they clearly knew who I was. And so I ended up in the VP of Marketing's office at the end of the day. And he said, we'd love to work with you guys, but unfortunately we do agency of record contracts. And I said, you do what? And he said, oh yeah, it's an annual contract. We have 10 agencies. But he said, I got a new products group down the street. Go down and see if they've got anything for you. So I did, and they were wanting to introduce a light beer from Plank Road Brewery and didn't ask us to do anything for free. And that was our first project. I flew back to St. Louis. We resigned Anheuser-Busch, and they were shocked. They're like, what do you mean you're resigning us? And I said, well, we're not going to work with you guys anymore. Well, what do you mean? You're one of our big 3 agencies. How can you do that? And I said, look, it's not profitable. I said, if you want to see my books, happy to show you. Other agencies feel the same way. And they were just the 1,000-pound gorilla. They didn't care. And so we moved on and we moved to Miller Brewing Company, which was a prescient move. I mean, it ended up being a massive client. They resigned all of those other agencies after 3 years and gave us all the business.
Wow. And was that the way you're describing it, and it's with hindsight, like we talked about, it doesn't sound like it was a big, scary move. But
it was a big, scary move. It was definitely.
I would imagine.
Yes. I mean, when you live and work in St. Louis, you know, almost everybody has worked there or knows somebody or had a family member. And I'm telling you, it was like evil if you talked about Miller or had Miller. My husband was so confused because at one point we could only drink AB, and then I threw all that out. And then he could only drink Miller, and he'd always try to sneak a, you know, like a Corona. And I'm like, no, you can't have that. And so, you know, it was interesting for a while and all of those people are still my friends. You know, like everybody that worked at AB are still very good friends.
I'm sure there's a lot of respect there as well, right? Because they push small agencies around there. It's part of the MO.
Yes. And many of their kids ended up working for me on the Miller business. Wow. So, you know, I mean, what was so interesting to me was Miller Brewing Company was public. They were a public company. Anheuser-Busch was public, but you never felt that way. You always felt that the Busch family had such a command and control of that business, and you felt totally responsible and loyal. So it was completely, different mindset in working for the two companies, but, loved them both. The beer business was very good to me. And then we were able to we had a lot of the Bacardi business. We ended up getting Google and Microsoft and Energizer battery. I mean, we had some really large clients that then wanted to emulate what Miller was doing. Like, we want the agency of record thing because it's more cost effective.
And what drove your success there? Was it your creativity? Was it because you had other big names and people wanted to give you a try? What do you think drove the success there?
It was definitely the creativity. I remember Philip Morris, the Marlboro account, they had used Leo Burnett for over 100 years at that point in time. And I had such respect for a company that would maintain that agency relationship. And what I came to learn is that, a lot of times when they get a new marketing person or a brand person, they want to come in and put their stamp on something and change everything, right?
Yeah.
The agency was there to not let that happen. They were the keepers of the brand.
Huh.
And so, but they were a little tired, right? After 100 years, your ideas are like, it's hard. And so they would hire us just to come up with creative concepts. And then Leo Burnett would execute them. So it was definitely our creativity, but I feel like, we built an account service group that really, we fought for our clients. We consumed our clients' products like we were the most loyal. And one time Miller said to me, what we really like about you guys is that you're so integrative with the sales and the national accounts, and you're riding trucks with the distributors. So it wasn't just, here's the marketing campaign. We drilled down, all the way to the distributor level through into the retail accounts, the bartenders.
So what does that mean, you were riding with the distributors? Did you just tell
trucks? Yeah, you ride trucks. You get out there.
You told Miller that, hey, to understand the business, we need to ride with your drivers?
That's right. We need to ride the trucks, and we need to go in and rotate the beer. And, at AB, you had to face all the cans and the bottles in the cooler, right? And then we would talk to the retailers, or we'd talk to the bartenders and kind of get, their take on things and how do they feel and what's the competition doing right. And, the delivery guys are too busy and they don't know what to do with that information anyway.
Right. So, is that where your best ideas came from?
Sure. Huh. And, a lot of things, you can have a good idea that might be hard to execute. So we had Burger King for a while, and fast food is just really challenging. But one of the things we did, my partner and I, is we said, we need to work there a day. And so they're like, okay, go get your uniforms, get your hat and get your Burger King shirt.
Yeah.
And I was back in the kitchen, making these Whoppers.
Yeah.
And I'm realizing that I'm surrounded by 15-year-old pimply-faced kids that could care less. And, they're not going to be able to execute a promotion that has, 2 steps to it.
Right.
So I think that endeared us to the client because, execution can fail and then the idea is not any good. So we really did try to understand our customers and our clients and the ultimate consumer to make sure what we did had impact.
And what was your biggest challenge to growing the agency in terms of talent and revenue and bodies and all the rest?
Well, it's like once you get an account, your concern is, so you staff it, right? We got all that Miller business. We had to hire 120 people in 90 days, which is impossible to do in St. Louis. So, you're hiring all these people. Some are not going to be great, that you're going to have to turn them over. They're going to have to learn and grow. Maintaining the culture was really something that we guarded because we felt like that's what was different about us and why people wanted to work for us. But then you have to worry about, well, what happens if we lose that customer? And we actually did. We lost Purina because they had an in-house agency and those people all wanted to work for us. So over time, we're hiring those people. And I went to lunch one day with the man who ran that division, and he basically threatened me. And he said, you take one more of our employees, and I will tell the CEO that you're not permitted in this building. And I said, this is a free market. These people can work anywhere they want.
The problem is it's not that it's not fun to sell animal food. It's not fun to only sell animal food, right? People
Exactly. That's what I told him. I said, these people have variety, and we love Purina. They loved the brand and the product, but they wanted that variety of work. And
sure.
We were a growing agency. I mean, we had hundreds of people working there. We did a lot to maintain our culture. So it was just fun. I mean, I had a huge bar and kitchen and everything was free. Because these kids worked really hard. It's like, bring the dog to work. You're not going to get home and walk it in time. So bring the dogs and kids. So
you, Zipatoni, you ran for 15-ish years?
Yes.
So if you started in 1990-ish?
Mm-hmm.
So it's to 2005 in that time.
Right.
So at what point did you start to think, wow, this is a lot, maybe it's worth something and we should sell it? Or did one day somebody just knock on your door and say, we're interested?
No, my partner Jack and I had decided early on, we had a plan. In 5 years, we're going to build it. In 5 years, we're going to sell it and move to Hawaii and drink wine and bake bread. So in 5 years, we were not big enough. And once we learned, okay, this is a multiple of your revenue, right? And EBITDA.
Mm-hmm.
So at 5 years, it wasn't enough money for either of us to retire. So we kept building. And then we started looking at so it became pretty popular in the 90s and the 2000s that these large conglomerates were acquiring agencies for the revenue roll up, right?
The big holdcos. Yeah.
Right. And then also for access to the clients we had. And we had really large, tasty clients.
Sure.
So we had Fallon McGilligan came to visit, and we had real respect for their creative. And we thought, when they were there, we're like wanting to show them all the creative, introduce them to the creatives, and all they wanted to see were the books.
Yeah.
And to us, that was like, okay, they don't really care about us, right? So we didn't do a deal with them. We had TBWA was interested. And then finally, IPG came, as we're building the agency and getting bigger, they came, and the Frank Lowe out of London looked at our shop and said, you guys remind me of the ad agencies in the 60s. Don't you ever change. And it's like, it's harder and harder to do, but they loved our creativity. And they liked how, we had staff and management there that could always climb into the C-suite at our clients' offices. And that's what I tell people, you can't just live at that brand manager level. You have to have somebody that is climbing up in the company, because you have to know what's keeping the C-suite awake at night to be successful. And so IPG seemed to be right. The timing was right. Our revenue was good. And there's an earnout. Obviously, they don't just write you a check and you toss them the keys.
Yeah.
Because, again, we have no assets. Our assets walked out the door every night. It's the people and our ability, to create compelling marketing campaigns for them. So they wanted a 5-year, we negotiated a 4-year earnout.
And when you, so give me a rough idea, how large were you at this stage?
So we were about 42 million in top line revenue. We had 350 employees. We had 5 offices around the country that lined up, with our bigger clients.
Yeah.
And we were really profitable. Again, being based in the Midwest.
So really profitable be what, 15-ish%, high teens?
A little more.
Okay. So you and Jack looked at each other and said, okay, let's do a transaction. Did you go hire a banker or did you manage it yourself?
So we had a guy that we hired from Ralston. He had been the assistant, like chief of staff for the CEO at Ralston. And, we really liked this guy. And I said, look, you're bored here. Why don't you come work for us? And he did. And he really managed that aspect of it. And we did look, yes. And he did research in terms of what kind of multiples are people paying. What was interesting, and I thought smart on their part, is that they incentivized us to have a higher profit margin percentage and absolute dollars. So we could increase that multiple from 4 to 5 to 6 if by the end of those 4 years, we could increase, the margin percentage. So, we worked hard on that.
Sure, with good incentive. So in cash at close was what, roughly 50%? Was it about half?
It was a third at close. And I think 2 years later, it was another third. And then the final was at the end.
So you got a third of cash at close. And so did they, I'm just going to throw out numbers for an example, but let's just assume that your EBITDA was 8. They said, the value of the company is 5 times that. So it's 40. We're going to pay you a third at close and then a third 2 years later. That can go up or down based on what
up or down happened at the end. They
only on the third
piece. At the very end. Yeah.
Gotcha. So the middle piece was just the second third.
Right. Right.
And then there's enough motivation that if you drive the numbers north, which makes the deal better for them and then better for you,
right,
that final multiple could not be 5. It could be 6 or 7 or whatever the number is.
Exactly.
And how did, one of the criticisms, not of IPG specifically, but of all the holdcos, is that the formula that they use for the earnout is so convoluted and hard to understand that you can't quite figure it out. It doesn't sound like yours was that bad at all.
It was not that complicated, honestly.
And how did you do on that third piece relative to what you thought you would do?
Well, we did better than the going in position, when we got our first third. So we did a little bit better. I think we hit their top number, which, again, we spent a lot of money on our culture. We just cut back a little bit on that.
Yeah.
In the last couple of years, and you could win the day. Now you had to maintain your client base, right? You had to maintain them or grow them or go get another one. So we always felt, and then just keeping the staff motivated. We were paying some of these young people a lot of money, back in the day. But they're talented and they're worth it. But then they're also getting poached by competitive agencies, for a lot more money. And so they'd come and put a gun to our head and say, hey, this guy's offering me 50 grand more. And we had to make a decision. Do we need to pay that 50 to keep them, or do we say bye-bye? And
when you look back now, and it's been a bunch of years, but when you look back now, what do you think you worried about that was unnecessary to worry about? And what do you wish you had paid more attention to?
What did I worry? Well, you always worried about, one of the things is, clients paying you on a timely basis. And that was one of our struggles with Anheuser-Busch. They were 180 days. And we had to pay our bills in 30, right? Yeah. Payroll comes twice a month. And our vendors were small, independent, businesses, and they couldn't wait that long.
Sure.
Oh, that was always a struggle, especially having somebody that's taking that much of your resource.
Right.
So once we got into the contracts, and it committed the money monthly, and you could count on that for 12 months, that made it much easier to run the business, right, instead of just project to project, where's the next buck going to come from? What I did worry about, and I think rightfully so, was losing an account and then having to let staff go that we had worked so hard to get. So people are the only thing you have in the business, right? And hanging on to them was critical to us.
So when you were 350 when you did the transaction, 4 years later, were you still about 350 employees?
Yeah, I would say we were. And, one of the fallacies I had thought, they sold us on this. just wasn't true, that we would be pitching business with them. So, because there's the above the line, the below the line. I mean, this was back in the day when network television was still big, radio was big, outdoor print, and that has all changed so dramatically now. But, they would bring us in for the brand development and package design and web work and promotion. And so we were really excited thinking, oh, we're going to get to work on some global clients. Not so much. The big agency guys are like, it's all about the network TV.
Right.
That really was one thing we had told our staff was going to be an opportunity, and it just wasn't.
So maybe you could drop a little bit of wisdom on us now, looking back over this from 10 or 15 years separation. Is there a nugget of wisdom in there that you would say, if you're going through a transaction, here's how to think about it, here's what you learned from it, here was the most important takeaway? Anything like that?
Yes. I would say, first of all, be true to yourself. If you are solely creative and that's what matters to you and the people that work for you, don't just go into a transaction because the founders are going to make the money and then walk away and wash your hands, right? Because these people can dissipate so quickly if it isn't what they signed up for. And we learned that, I guess not the hard way. We had made our money, but once Jack and I left, a lot of those young people left and started their own agency.
Interesting.
Yes, which really shocked us. But, now there's probably 5 agencies in St. Louis that were all started by Zipitone people, and they're doing great.
That's great.
But, and sometimes they don't want things to change. They want mom and dad to stay where they are. I came here to work for you. So, that I think is, people need to be eyes wide open. And I'm sure the big holdcos get that. But we valued our staff so much that I think they felt they weren't getting the attention that they did when we were all there.
Yeah, it's much different when the owner's not there. That's why having them part of the transaction is always important.
Right.
And then I also think it's always interesting to me because there's life after, right? After you do a transaction. And so you're into an interesting next career. Talk quickly about BeLeaf.
So I did retire in 2005. And it was my turn to become Mother of the Year. I had traveled a lot, the previous 25 years. So now it's like, okay, gonna be home. I'm getting chickens and bees and goats, and I'm gonna take care of the kids. And then my kids went to college in Boulder, Colorado. And as I was out there trying to hang around them, Colorado passed legal medical cannabis. And I was just fascinated that this entirely new industry was springing up before my eyes. And I'm a lifelong learner. So I'd knock on doors and go introduce myself. How does this work? What's going on? And first of all, what I experienced was such a community. People who wanted to be in cannabis would help anybody else that wanted to be in cannabis, which was foreign to me, working for, Anheuser-Busch and Miller and Coke and Pepsi. They were just always such rivals. You couldn't talk to each other. These people were so helpful. And I was watching some of the medical patients and the instruction that they were getting in these dispensaries. So I live in Illinois, and I came back home, and there was a legislative bill coming through our legislature at the time for a medical cannabis program. So an investor approached me and said, would you be willing to invest in that? And I said, I would. I've seen this in Colorado, and it's really mind-blowing. So I was thinking I would, attend a couple of meetings a year, put a little money in. But what happened was it fell on me to get the licenses because I lived in Illinois. So I had to find real estate. I had to do the zoning. I had to do city council meetings. And back in 2013, it was like I was bringing plutonium to these small towns in Illinois. I mean, literally 200 people would show up at a zoning meeting to run me out of town.
Wow.
And then they would show up and it's like, oh, she's a mom and a wife and she just lives down the street and grew up on that farm. Like, we can't be mad at her. And then I could just tell them the story and how it works and who uses it. And by the end of the meeting, I'd have them all agreeing to it. So I ended up getting a dispensary license up in Chicago. And then in Missouri, we had a license for 2 people to cultivate, produce oil, and treat epilepsy patients. So I applied for that and got it. And that was just a mind-blowing experience to me, treating these little kids having 50 to 300 seizures a day with a simple CBD hemp oil preparation, and stopping those seizures was just so gratifying.
Yeah, it's life-changing, right?
It's unbelievable. And so then what I realized was we were the first cannabis grow in Missouri in 83 years. So I'm like, okay, I've got the display home. I'm bringing in the cops, the priests, the ministers, the lawyers, the school teachers, the doctors, the banks. I want them to all see this and see what it is and what it isn't. And it was the best thing we did. And I brought together a group of business people that wanted to put together a constitutional amendment to go after medical licenses in Missouri. And we did that. It was voted on in 2018, and it was overwhelmingly voted for. So I ended up putting together an investment group to apply for licenses. And under the Missouri law, you could own 10 licenses. It's a vertical. So you could cultivate, you can manufacture, and you can dispense and sell retail. So we applied for all 10, which again, you had to find the real estate, you had to get the architectural plans done, all the security overlays done, put together the written, it's like the worst term paper you've ever written, and do that 10 times. And our strategy was, if we apply for 10, maybe we'll get one of each. And that's all we were going to, plan to get.
Yeah.
And, we were only raising like $8 million to do that, one of each. And I've told my partners since then, we had a failure of imagination, right? We didn't assume we would win all 10, and we did. So it was like the dog that caught the car.
Right.
Beginning of COVID, we find out we have 3 cultivation licenses, 2 manufacturing, and 5 dispensary licenses. Go. You got 12 months to get it all operational. And so that was a challenge. We were having to raise capital while we're building. Obviously, with COVID, the market's upside down. A lot of people that would have invested didn't want to take their money out of the market. Supply chain issues were a mess. But we just kept going and building and opening what we could, and we made it. And so now it's we're back to 250 employees. I always swore I would never have another employee, but we're to 250 and growing, and hopefully, putting together a really nice, profitable business. Now I know how to do this, right? So I know that to get the revenue, top line revenue up, get our EBITDA looking good. They pay a multiple of EBITDA. And I believe with, a lot has changed in cannabis in the last 12 years that I've been involved. But I think we're going to see the government reschedule it from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3, which really helps cannabis businesses financially because of the tax rules.
Right.
And we also need traditional banking. We cannot get access to.
I know. It's silly, isn't it?
No, It's crazy. It's crazy expensive.
And I'll tell you.
So once that happens, then we're going to be another acquisition target. And then I promise I'm not getting back into anything.
Well, we'll see. I'm sure you said that the first time. We'll have you back on to talk. But BeLeaf is BeLeaf medical.com. And that'll also be in the show notes. But if you're listening, you can go there. I think it also underscores the fact that, after any transaction, you never know what comes around the corner. But being somebody that has successfully built and exited a business seems to be that things line up a little bit more easily the second time around. Investors and people that want to be your customers and people that believe in you and want to be your employees and the rest. So this has been great insight, Mitch. So I want to just say thanks for joining and sharing. It's just, it's so interesting, especially from back in the day when creative drove everything, right? And then there was some media buy to the way that the world is today. but I will say thank you. I didn't say thanks before, but our sponsors are the people at Fiscal Advocate. They're actually a Chicago-based company as well. They're terrific. They actually help agency founders organize their financials so that they can see their business more clearly from a financial perspective. So thanks to our friends at Fiscal Advocate. Mitch Meyers, thank you to you, and best of luck with BeLeaf as you continue to move forward.
Thanks a lot, Todd. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.